Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Cinderbrandt sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Cinderbrandt.
Welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. I'm your host, Gary Cinderbrandt. Guest today that it's going to be kind of hard to describe, as some of you may know that listen to the show. A lot of my guests are that way because they always end up someplace else where they thought they would be. Well, in this case, our guest today, Brian Samson, not only ended up in a different industry than he probably initially imagined, but kind of has co-located and recognized that it doesn't matter where you are as much as what you do and what you provide. Brian is currently the CEO and founder of Plug Technologies, which, by the way, is not a technology company, although closely aligned. Coming out of UCLA with an MBA, Brian basically moved up to San Francisco, had a couple of interesting jobs in the tech space /HR, I think, and then one of them actually IPO'd, which must have been a nice day, and decided to move on from there. Brian, welcome to the show. I'm really interested to hear about your journey, and if we can start in San Francisco postgraduate and walk me right through to your geography moves, your business evolution, and how you ended up in Hawaii running a company that staffs American companies from Latin America.
That's right.
I said that right.
Yeah.
Take it away, sir.
Absolutely. So just so your audience knows, I didn't grow up in a family of entrepreneurs. My dad worked for the same manufacturing company forever. This was just like a total scary thing for me. I always thought it was for other people to do. And I ended up in San Francisco. So grew up in the Midwest, ended up in San Francisco, where, I continued my career as basically a recruiter, but moved up the ranks. So I was running recruiting for a bunch of venture capital funded tech startups, and there's a billion of them in San Francisco. Everywhere you turn, every office, there's a new startup, and you see the evolution, from IoT and fintech and SaaS, and now it's AI. There's always a new technology, there's always new VC money, and there's always a something that's all the rage. But the one thing that they had in common was once they raised capital, they had to do a lot of hiring. So that's where I came in. They raised $10 million or $20 million. About 70% of that is allocated towards labor, mostly technical labor. So they would need someone like me to kind of spend all day sourcing and recruiting and trying to find the talent, to grow that company and increase the valuation, go to market, beat the competition. Maybe they'd be in that 1% category that had a successful IPO. So I did that a couple different times. The two success stories that I'd say as a non-founder, just working in these companies, was a fintech called Lending Club, which when I joined in like 2012, 2013, seemed like only finance people knew who it was. And my job was to try to convince engineers to join it. It had a pretty successful IPO run, but pretty quickly a major crash. So it IPO'd in 2014, at the end of 2014, at a 10 billion valuation, which was the second biggest IPO that year after Alibaba. But within a year, there was a bunch of scandals, and the company is worth less than $1 billion today. I used some of that, actually most of that, to pay for grad school. So I decided to get in this program. It was a pretty interesting program. It was with UCLA, but also National University of Singapore. And I'll just quickly talk about the other exit, and then I'll talk about grad school. So the other exit I had is I worked for another tech startup. This was like a Series B company. It was called Soch, and Series B, if your audience doesn't know, it's kind of like a mid-stage startup. And it wasn't a successful outcome in reality. It just looks good on paper, for appearances. And I can say this a decade later, but Postmates, which was a big delivery courier startup company, basically bought the talent from Soj. And then later on, Uber bought Postmates, and you still might see a couple people that stuck around for the full decade, from Soj all the way to Uber. That wasn't me because I was in the middle of grad school. I had a totally different thesis, and I love the concept of your show of where do we intend to go and where do we end up? Because you'll never believe it, but I picked the NUS, National University of Singapore and UCLA program, mostly for the NUS part. Everybody knows UCLA.
Sure.
But not many people know that NUS is actually among the top universities in all of Asia. And everybody in Asia knows it. Nobody in the States cares. But everybody in Asia seems to know that NUS is prime school. And all I wanted to do was be an expat in Asia. I just had this vision of, I'd done a little bit of travel, skyscrapers in Shanghai and Singapore, and you see all these like Westerners as expats just living the life. And I really wanted that experience. And I grew up in a pretty sheltered, I didn't really leave the Midwest for vacations. We go to Wisconsin and didn't get a passport until my late 20s. So I felt like I had a lot of catching up to do, and I wanted that expat experience. And I realized it was pretty hard. I was living in San Francisco. It was pretty hard to kind of will my way to an expat experience over Skype. And I think I realized quickly that expats were usually people that had been working for a company for years, and then they'd get moved. And, but I wrongly assumed that maybe I could kind of will my way to this, or by being charming over Skype. So I did have one person that had been a really successful entrepreneur, and he was running a pretty large company, like $1 billion company in Shanghai. And I kind of knew him barely, so I hardly say it was a relationship, but I was so determined that I reached out to him. Can I work for you in Shanghai? And then his first question was, well, do you speak Mandarin? Well, no, I don't. Well, come back to me, I appreciate your industriousness here, but come back to me when you got something else. So, I thought, okay, let me think. And I'm bad at a lot of things, but one thing I'm pretty good at is like pattern matching and like trying to see gaps and patterns. And after working for Lending Club, which is a prominent fintech, I noticed the rise of fintech at the time, and they all had this common pattern of business guys were running these things, finance guys, business guys, they had access to as much capital as they wanted, pretty good product vision, and totally agnostic on how their minimum viable product, their MVP, that's like the first version of the software, was built. Could care less. They just wanted, some, in their eyes, they just wanted the geeks to build them what they wanted. So I came back to that business person in Shanghai and said, oh, you know what? I actually have idea for a company. We could build the MVPs for all these fintechs in San Francisco and New York. And, I'm kind of on the fly putting together, a business plan, pitch deck, forecasts, models, discounted cash flow, all this stuff. I'm kind of learning how to do it on the fly, or, whatever I'm learning in business school this week goes into the pitch deck, right? And he liked it, and he didn't want to do it from Asia. And, and I thought, okay, that's fine. I can live with that. And years prior, I had done like a solo backpacking trip to Argentina, stayed in hostels, kind of did that whole thing. And I remember like the English was really good there. It seemed really inexpensive. I happened to know a couple of people that worked in the tech space there. So that became a piece of that business plan. Let's put our software developers there. And he got it. He was sold. So he tranched the investment, which means kind of piecemeal instead of one big check. But In aggregate, it was about $2 million that he invested. And that was really my first entrepreneurship ride. And I decided to move to Argentina and do entrepreneurship on hard mode. And, really a first time founder, but doing this in a different country with different rules, understanding how to set up payroll and get an office and hire the first couple people and set up accounting and all these different things, transfer pricing, selling to US companies. But we built this dev shop essentially where we grew it to about 80 software engineers in Argentina. And we were doing this for fintech customers. And I ran that for 4 years. But during that time period, I ended up moving to Oahu, Hawaii. Started having kids. We've got a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old now. And I'll tell you, Gary, there is no easy way to get from Hawaii to Argentina.
I imagine.
And the travel was a killer. When we started having little babies, I just didn't want to be away anymore. So I sold my stake in that business. The business is still operating today, but I sold all my shares, but decided that Nearshore was the game that I wanted to play. And Nearshore is really relative to where you are in the world. Offshore, everybody knows there's a big ocean in between different time zones. Nearshore is really just a different version of same time zone, but a developing country supporting a developed country. So in Asia, Oceania, you could say the Philippines are a nearshore country for Australia or Japan or Singapore. In the States, nearshore is really Latin America. So I've been hooked on this ride ever since, and I've spent the last decade of my career in Latin America, and I hope to spend the next decade focused on Latin America.
So I want to make sure I understand. So I get the original idea. How do you assemble a team of 80 plus software developers to meet the needs of startups that probably have founders that aren't real tech savvy? Or did the startups have CTOs that knew what to ask for as far as wireframing and design? I mean, walk me through that if you would.
Yeah, it was kind of a mixed bag. We had some tech savvy customers, some that weren't very tech savvy. The ones that were not tech savvy, we could do the full, and I'll say there's kind of two ways companies might buy engineering services. The first is what I call like a fixed price project. So there's a clear deliverable of you're going to ship this. This is what the end result, what the web application, the mobile application is going to look like, the functionality, all that stuff. And we had all the middle men to do that. We had the architects, the product people, the CTOs, the senior developers. We had all that in our company. So we could gather the requirement, spec it out, and deliver a fully executed piece of software. The other way, which seems to work more often when that company's a little bit bigger and they have their own tech people, but what they really need is acceleration through staffing. So they need more bodies, more good coders. Maybe they want talent arbitrage, so they get senior people for the cost of junior people. Or in a place like San Francisco, where in tight labor markets, there's way more jobs available than there are coders. So sometimes you just need access to a different talent market. It's not even just about cost. It's about access to labor that knows what they're doing, that can build it, think creatively, solve problems. So Argentina has always been a really good place for that. They export a lot of talent, meaning they stay in Argentina, but they're working remotely for US companies. So they're kind of used to US culture, US norms, software rhythms, agile environments. So for those larger companies, we would basically source, screen, vet software developers. And then oftentimes that client might do a final interview just to make sure. And then it becomes a recurring revenue business. So the first model, the fixed price project, the client doesn't care if we have 3 engineers or 30. It's not really none of their business. They just want the end software to work.
Okay.
And the other model, they're paying directly for man hours. but it also gives them flexibility. So, on a week to week basis, maybe their product guy has a different vision. They're not locked into anything. They can pivot, shift, change their mind. Oftentimes executives, chase bright, shiny things. So they want a flexible software team. But the first model, once that work was done, that's it. And the second model, it's recurring revenue. We send an invoice every month for, hours billed.
So are those coders actually working for the US company, or they're working for you and
They're
you're under
on
contract with the US company?
they're on our payroll, and then we're sending an invoice to that US customer.
So it keeps the US customers' payroll thin, keeps their OASD&I and all their other taxes somewhat down, medical costs and things like that.
That's right.
So you're offshoring that as well. So there's a great advantage.
That's right.
And also the flexibility of kind of hiring almost on a fractional level with you in the middle. So I would say that the friction point would probably come down, correct me if I'm wrong, to your ability to assess proper talent and match it with proper need.
Yeah, we would need to be really good at aligning talent and culture. And I'll share, I think, what I later identified as an issue with my own company and what is different about my current company today. I realized pretty quickly when you have your own leadership team of technical people, they've got some pretty strong opinions. They bring their own bias to everything. And often I think, bias and stereotypes, we've kind of been trained like these are bad things. And maybe they are, but I also think that these are real things that just exist, and a way that I might even share like a kind of an obvious example. You think about Facebook meta culture 10 years ago, at least, versus Google 10 years ago, in the tech world. Who did Google hire? They hired highly educated academic PhDs. Who did Facebook hire? They hired the dropout hackers that would move quick and break things. And that was ethos of their culture, right? So that meant that if you're a hiring manager at Facebook, you're looking for the guy with open source code and they're hacking stuff and the PhD resume, that's not really a fit for us. And same thing on the Google side. They get the college dropout resume. This is not for us. Like they're bringing their bias, to the table. So I realized that we, as a tech leadership team, brought tons of bias, as we were looking at and evaluating resumes. This person's great, and then the customer might think not for us, right? And then you kind of have this clash. So as I founded Plug almost 4 years ago, Plug is straight staffing, and we fully embrace and make it our most important factor in understanding what does our customer want, what do they need, what are their biases, like what's their baggage, what are they bringing into this decision. And again, good, bad, it's just being real, authentic, truthful. What are they bringing to it? So we don't have technical architects and lead software developers internally. We're peer recruiting. So our value add is finding people that our customers are specifically looking for and not challenging them and bringing our own issues to it, accepting that this is what they want, and then we source for it.
How are you able to, because you don't come from a technical or coding background, how are you able to determine first what the need might be from the business guy with the cool idea and the tech guys on the other side, and there's probably 12 different ways to build what the business guy wants to do.
Yeah.
How do you determine what that match is going to be? Are you going to build it as, server based? Is it going to be a SaaS base? Is it going to sit? How do you, and also how do you work through kind of that enterprise deployment? Is that the same person? Do they have experience with Amazon Web Services and EC2 usage and SOC 2 and all the things you need to do to deploy these days? How do you kind of match all those pieces up coming from a non-tech background?
Yeah, great question. And I think it goes back to my first company where we had fixed price projects and all of the technical leadership versus, the staffing. And staffing is strictly what it is. But that also means that if you're like a three-person company of purely business people, we're probably not the right fit for you. And that's okay. We can't be the right fit for everybody because we're staffing. I think like that when I say small company, it's kind of right on that border between small to mid-sized, and then, also mid-sized companies where they have their own engineering leaders,
I see.
directors, project managers, product people. So they know what type of labor that they need because they've reversed engineered based on their product roadmap, their sprint cycles, their budgets, and then it's just a matter of getting the correct talent. Where I think if they didn't have all of that, that's where it's just probably not a good fit, and that's okay.
So you're not really building MVP as much as you are filling out, second and
Yeah,
third generation product that's already got market fit and market traction.
yeah, we're really a talent arbitrage partner.
I like that. That makes sense. Now, is Latin America, are there other areas? I mean, I'm told that, if you get over to a place like Slovenia, they're just hip deep and brilliant people that can code anything, or some of
Yeah.
the Near East European countries. Are you going to be limited to kind of the near shore, or do you look at opportunities for talent globally?
Yeah, our bread and butter is Latin America. I've been doing this for 10 years. I have a business partner who's our president, who was an expat in Monterrey, Mexico. And, I was an expat in Argentina. So we know this world from firsthand experience, which I think gives us a big edge. We've seen the restaurant prices in chalk because of inflation. We've seen the long queues, but we've also seen beautiful tree-lined streets and cafes and steak dinners for $40, for two people. So we've kind of seen the good, the bad. We can talk to it. We understand what it means to entities and payroll and legal and the geopolitics, the nuances, and also make recommendations based on our customer is a mid-sized fintech that needs to ship expensive laptops, right? So we know, okay, maybe Mexico is more interesting or feasible than Brazil, even though Brazil is a fantastic market for talent. It's just really hard to get hardware there, right? Due to customs and tariffs and all sorts of stuff and protectionist environments. So this comes from 10 years of being able to advise and oh, they want a call center. Well, let's talk about the difference between Nicaragua and Costa Rica and talent availability, price, hardware, risk, volatility. These are all things that we're able to advise on. But we feel that it's better to be really good at one area of the world than try to be decent everywhere. And maybe that's something I would suggest on all entrepreneurs. Whatever you choose, I think the riches are in the niches, and being really great at one category, then okay to good in a lot of different ones.
And I know that impacts, you mentioned bright, shiny things with a lot of business people who are founders. They get one good idea, and before that idea really takes flight, they just want to start doing other things that kind of
Yeah.
adjacent to that idea. And unfortunately, they take the eye off the ball and it never works.
Yeah.
So you came into this at a time when having the ability to code was at a premium.
Hmm.
And there were some limited number of coders, whether you were coding in Python, whether you were coding in JavaScript, whatever it might have been. And now we've got applications out there like Claude Code, Cursor, Vibe coding, where you can just start to talk to the thing in English. And the next thing you know, it's basically, it says, are you ready to deploy? The next thing you know, you're on GitHub and Vercel and your app is running and you're like, it's the same day. So I know that has to have an impact because I know that some of these coding tools,
Yeah.
especially tools like Claude Code,
Yeah.
are just moving at light speed. How does that impact what you're doing? Does it,
Yeah.
and most,
Yeah.
and my belief is most of the founder types probably have no idea that's even out there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's an excellent question. My point of view, I think, might challenge your initial assumption in that I think it has never been easier to get an initial application out the door. It's never been easier. product vision to like a working prototype, pretty decent code, vibe coding, all that stuff, right? Where we have not seen any impact. In fact, we've never been busier is these mid-sized companies. Because the problem with the code generators, the Claude code, all this is if you already have legacy code, there's a lot of complexity built in and trying to integrate new AI code. It's not always clean as you'd hope either. There's a
Oh
lot of
no, it's not clean at all. I have
yeah,
personal experience.
yeah.
I phase that question because I've just been through that, and
Yeah,
fortunately, I've got quote unquote friends in the industry
yeah,
who are taking an idea that I had that I vibe coded into a prototype, which was way better than I thought it would be.
yeah,
But I realized to take it to the next level. In other
yeah,
words, all of my stuff, all my algorithms, they're all running on the console. All you do is hit F12 and you see everything I built. It's
yeah,
like, I can't do that. And so
yeah,
fortunately, we spent the last several months refactoring and cleaning it all up, but
yeah,
they use what I built as the general guide, but to say it was ready for deployment or even an MVP demo, prototype worked, idea was good. Now we're
yeah,
almost ready to take it to market, but I couldn't agree with you more. If I didn't have these two professionals fixing my UX and getting me ready to go, I'd be laughed out of any pitch meeting. So
yeah, yeah,
I hear where you're coming from. Comment if you will, though, because I think ultimately it's great for your business. I'm a bit unusual. I was the geek that bought the first, IBM PC that came out,
yeah.
plugged it into the back of my TV set, and I blew up the TV set and the computer. I think this is probably before you were born. Like, the IBM AT with,
Sure.
25 megabytes of hard memory was $6,000. So, I mean, just to give you an idea how long I'm playing with this stuff.
Yeah,
So I think I credit myself knowing what I don't know
sure.
is better than knowing what I do. But I think a lot of people are almost afraid to break the thing that you can always fix. In other words, somebody has a good idea. Hey, wouldn't this be a good idea? Okay, so fine. Sit down with Claude, sit down with Grok or Perplexity or Gemini. Type in your idea, see if it can solve a problem somewhere. And is there something you can do to kind of make that friction point more available, more slippery to allow you to overcome that, possibly in some way? Uber is a good example of that. Open Table is a good example of that. These are not high tech companies, but they saw a real world problem and said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this?
Yeah. I think what we're going to see, we're already seeing, but we're going to see a lot more of is, I like that word you use, friction. I mean, I remember, 10, 20 years ago, it took a lot of money to get ideas to market. You're seeing a lot of one, two, three-person companies now, apps like Lovable, Make, N8N, automation, workflows, AWS is cheaper. It's just so much easier to get new ideas to market, get some initial funding. But then with what happened to you, probably a lot of refactoring. Okay, now it's real. Now we got to scale. Now we got to go to market. There's a lot of, APIs, code cleanup, QA, rewriting the next generation of the software. So it's never been easier to get ideas to market, but I think there's still a tremendous gap in the next iteration.
You talked before about pattern recognition, and I think that's a great skill to have. You kind of go where you think things are headed, and maybe there were 2 million really great coders you could point to 5 years ago. A year from now, you have 2 billion people that can kind of
Yeah.
at least get.
Yeah,
They're not gonna win the game, but they can get a ticket to the game.
sure.
Have you considered at all kind of any type of product or idea that might stimulate somebody that might not be like me? They may have a great idea,
Yeah,
but absolutely no experience with
yeah,
Lovable and they can barely work their iPhone
yeah,
to turn them on to vibe coding, to turn them on to getting
yeah,
that
yeah.
prototype
Well,
out
let me
there,
give
which would
you,
naturally lead to
yeah,
you.
yeah. Well, let me give you an example of something that we did internally that I think has kind of been a game changer. And a lot of times, I think we as founders we're hearing everyone talk about AI and agents and automation and robots, but sometimes we just need tangible ideas of like what are people really building, And a good example for us is it's important for me and my business to have a LinkedIn presence. And we've got a lot of content. We have our own podcast. We've got about 80 episodes. We talk a lot about doing business in Latin America and a lot of blogs and articles, white papers, content. So we've got no shortage of content. But I'll still tell you, 6 months ago, you wake up and it's kind of stressful. Like I got to come up with something creative to write and say on LinkedIn, every day, even though I had all this content in this big, library. So we vibe coded a whole LinkedIn automation workflow. So we airtabled, the 80 episodes, which really meant, 400 videos because they each had 5 different shorts, within. So, and it's all connected to either ChatGPT or Claude and connected to LinkedIn. And so it's all categorized too. So now I get this email that just comes to me every day at 6 a.m. of, do you want to write about, or do you want to post about talent, geopolitics, software engineering, product, something else? Okay. And then I drop down, I pick one of the drop downs. And then it's, do you want to feature a guest that's from Latin America or the States? And out of our 80 episodes, it's almost 40-40. We've had entrepreneurs and VCs in Latin America, engineering leaders in the States, so it's pretty split. And then whose account do I want to post it to? Me. So it's just, 3 clicks. And 30 seconds later, I get a post, I get an embedded video from the podcast. It's all tagged, properly allocated. But I also have this like last line of defense. If I'm like, this looks terrible, let's try it again. But 90% of the time, it's probably better than I would have come up with. So, 3 clicks, 30 seconds, instead of this like pressure that I had every morning of trying to come up with something clever all by myself when, I've got 500 other problems to focus on as a founder.
Yeah, I am. I'm with you 100%. I ended up doing something relatively similar with, I used Claude. I have a lot of training content, a lot of materials that I've done and basically worked in the financial world over long periods of time. So I uploaded a lot of those videos to unlisted YouTube, got the transcriptions, just gave this giant disorganized file to Claude, said, I put it in the same project file as the software I'm building. And I said, give me 14 to 28 interesting tidbits that I can post on LinkedIn every third day. Boom. Took me another 10 minutes to load them all into Buffer. And I get a signal which says you're down to your last 2 or 3, and I come up with something else. And ironically, Brian, the next thing I'm going to do is start to load in my YouTube episodes. This will be on YouTube too, similar to what you're doing, but I haven't found the software yet that can extract or embed the video with the interesting idea.
Airtable.
What's it called?
Airtable. It's kind of like
is it EAR?
AIR, Airtable. Yeah.
Airtable.
So we're storing. So I think it's like extracting, storing, categorizing, so that it's easy to pull what we want when we want.
And you just give it the context of what you're looking for, and it goes and it just pulls it.
That's right.
This was worth the trip to get here because I wanted to add my videos in. I also wanted to start extracting because I've got, I think, 60 or 70 really interesting episodes.
Yeah.
I mentioned before how you came to the name Plug. You got to share that with me before we close.
I wish it was like a brilliant, story, but I think the advice that I got early on is if you can't think of 10 ideas, think of 20. And what that really does for me, and I tell people all the time if they're stuck, is if you can't think of 10, think of 50, And basically what I think we do a lot is we censor ourselves too much. Like we nix ideas right as we write them down or they come off our tongue, and then we put all this immense pressure and you can't think of anything, right? So, I was just like sitting down one day, I had some other business colleagues and let's just fire away, so we threw like 50 names on the board and started playing around with it and looking at domains and everything. And we like Plug. I think the pun of it is like, let's plug in talent at your company. But, that's not even as important as I think it's a 1-syllable name that is mostly easy to spell and find. And we've been pretty happy with it.
That's cool. I had a guest on some time ago. That was the founder of Zico coconut water.
Yeah.
Also a Latin American root in that he was an executive with a packaging company. I'm trying to remember which one, paper and
Okay.
packaging, and basically living in Latin America and found how coconut water was just, no big deal. It was the daily drink. So
Yeah.
from there, he founded Zico, started selling it literally out of the back of a truck in New York, got some traction, believe it or not, with Bikram Yoga Studios
Oh, wow.
is how he
Okay.
showed up, literally
Yeah.
selling it out of a truck. I said, how'd you come up with Zico? He said, we just sat around. We wanted something people could remember that you'd notice. And there's not a lot of companies out there with four
Yeah.
letters that begin with Z. I said, that was it. He goes, that was it.
Yeah.
So long story short, Coca-Cola buys him in the early 2000s for I think 200 or $300 million and
Yeah.
buys the
Yeah.
company back 2 years ago for 20 million. That was a good arbitrage.
Wow.
So
That's incredible. That's
I mean, it
incredible.
was, and, he started out working, I think it was International Paper was his original job. So, Brian, this is just fascinating stuff. I'm definitely checking out Airtable. For anyone out there, I would leave you with kind of two messages.
Yeah.
And Brian, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. One being speaking as an inventor, if you will, or a founder. I had a great idea for a piece of software in financial services that I got to prototype using Lovable, and then quickly realized I was onto something, and then even more rapidly realized I had no idea how to turn it from a working prototype into a real product. Now, I was fortunate. I had some
Yeah.
friends in the business that loved the idea and are getting me to the point now where I'm enterprise ready. I know we're going to need more people as
Yeah.
we develop further, so we could be calling you for
Okay.
supplemental talent, but I'm going to
We'll be
have
ready.
my chief engineer reach out and say, hey, here's what I need, because
Yeah.
I won't even know what to ask for. But the story that I really want to emphasize is I knew a little bit about it. I knew it could be done. I had no idea that I could just speak in plain language to some of these
Yeah.
vibe coding tools, including Claude
Yeah.
Code
Isn't that
and
cool?
Lovable and some of the other ones you mentioned. So don't be shy. If you've got an
Yeah.
idea, sit down, open up Claude, and just start talking to it. Gemini will do the same thing. Don't be
Yeah.
afraid when you see code appear on the screen because that's what they want to do.
Yeah.
So the distance is not that great. And I would encourage you, if you just have a good idea, you want to see if it goes anywhere. I came up with my working prototype. It took me 2 days to come up
Yeah.
with literally a working prototype. So
Yeah.
I would emphasize that. Tell me how people find you
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
what your ideal client looks like.
Yeah. Something I'll just add as a reinforcement is I think my favorite part of ChatGPT is the voice. So like, I've got the Bluetooth and I'll just kind of hook it up while I'm driving and talk to it. Because to your point, I think when I write, I've got my fingers on the keyboard. I'm trying too hard to like have the right scope and the right prompt. But when I'm just talking casually, it's pretty good at understanding what I'm trying to say and then reframing it. And then I can ask a tighter question because, it's almost like re-asking me the question or, what would you like me to do next? But where can people find me? I really appreciate that. Plug Technologies, and the website there is plugg.tech, TECH. My email is simply brian@plug.tech. And our ideal customer, I think we talked about this a little bit, is you probably already know what type of talent you need. You're just looking for a way to get access to that talent. And I'll say the market has shifted a lot over the last few years. I think we used to want to jump to Fiverr or Upwork and kind of do it yourself. But a lot of the better talent, they're not on those platforms anymore. There's a lot of cost prohibitive things that I think just dumb decisions, honestly, that those platforms did to deter the best talent. So a lot of people they're looking for people that can connect them, facilitate. They're looking for interesting projects. They're looking for challenges. They're looking for pay in US dollars. They're looking for remote work. But most importantly, if you think about the history of Latin America, it's a volatile place where people don't naturally trust new entrants. You need to earn the credibility. And that's what I've worked so hard for the last 10 years to do is earn the credibility of the talent. We take care of them, we pay them. So when we reach out, they know us, they check references of other talent, And that helps us a lot in making the right introductions.
Brian, it's such a cool niche that you're in, large barrier of entry. You got a nice moat that you created around you and the flexibility to deliver. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's a really fascinating story. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Best of luck in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.